and we'd be fine. But I just want to welcome everyone here. My name is Michelle McGrath. I am the project coordinator for the Waunakee Community Cares Coalition. And just a little bit about the coalition. We are in Waunakee. We've been here since 2014, I believe. And just recently, a couple years ago, we got a substantial grant from Drug-Free Communities. And so they were able to have a full-time person. And so then I was hired this past this past July, and now have been working in this capacity with the district and throughout the community. And so we are able to do lots of things now that we weren't able to do, and that's including this community series that we have right now. But our mission at the coalition is to keep Waunakee healthy and resilient. And a lot of our work centers around alcohol and drug prevention, as well as mental health, and working with our schools, working with our community. And for the month of April, we wanted to do some community events that would reach out and share with our community some of the work that's going on within the coalition and some of the challenges that we're seeing are faced by our young people in our community as well. So this particular topic is super pertinent, super important, and one that I think is probably the most challenging for us, and that is when we look at especially addiction and fentanyl poisoning and opioid overdose, that it's an important topic that we don't talk enough about in our community as well as in the world. So we have some incredible speakers here that are going to share their stories. They have had horrible things show up on their doorstep, but they also have been inspiring and such advocates for so many when it comes to working through the challenges that are going on right now in this space of fentanyl poisoning and in opioid overdose. So we are going to start, so a little bit how this will happen, what will work tonight is I'm going to have each of the individual panelists, they're going to come up, share their story and share their information. And then we'll go through all three of them. And then at the end, we will stop recording and then we'll open it up for questions and have a conversation. So with that, I have three guests tonight. We have Charles Tubbs. Charles has been a great friend of mine for lots of years, a fellow Rotarian down at Madison downtown, but also will share his story about losing his son to fentanyl poisoning. And he also works in the space with Dane County Emergency, Homeland Security, and all sorts of things that he will share in a second. We also have Michelle Kullman, who is going to share her story of recently losing, tragically, her son to fentanyl poisoning, but also about all the advocacy efforts that she's been doing and really making a difference. So, and then we have Jess, who is our AODA coordinator at the high school here in Waunakee. And so she's going to share some resources and things for families and that things that our children and our community can have access to. So with that, I'm going to welcome up Charles Tubbs. Thanks so much for joining us, Charles. I'll give it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, and good evening. Good evening. I want a little participation here, okay? I really want to thank Michelle for brainstorming this event here tonight. This is well overdue, and not by her part, but it's well overdue. And I want to thank Michelle, the other Michelle, I'm sorry, and Jess as well for their participation and bringing such a critical situation to our attention. How many of you are familiar with fentanyl? How many of you know how bad it is? How many of you believe, and this is not to put you on the spot, you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to, but how many of you believe that your child would never try it? That's a tough one. Our young people will try just about anything nowadays. We did it as kids growing up. I remember I was 14. We won the state basketball tournament in 1969. These mean high school cheerleaders took us out, got us drunk, and the police came and arrested us. No one would ever believe that Charles Tubbs would be drunk or drinking anywhere. No one would ever believe that. Nobody could believe that. So I'm just giving you an idea. We can get involved in things even when we don't want to. My career, I spent 40 years in law enforcement. I spent 5 years running the state prison system, juvenile division. And I spent the last 8 years now. I'm old, so I'll just let you know. The last 8 years as the director of emergency management, and the last 20 years working as a lecturer, observer, speaker, think tank member of the Department of Homeland Security. And I can tell you this right now, this is one of the all-time crises that we are facing right now in this country. Over 100,000 deaths last year, and it's still growing. I faced 9/11. You guys remember 9/11? I was in Washington, D.C. with a group of others teaching the consequences of terrorism when that happened and got involved. Very humbling experience. I was a police chief at the state capitol doing Act 10 when our teachers unfortunately lost some really credible rights, and the unions became an issue in the eyes of some. I faced angry mobs, the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazis at a very unbelievable time in my life when I was younger. But the most devastating thing I've ever had was losing my son. There's just no answers to it. You go back and you look, maybe I should have did this. Maybe we could have done this. Maybe we could have done other things. But we did the best we can. And I want to tell you tonight as parents, you can only do the best you can. We can't sit with them around the clock. We can't monitor them around the clock. They get out and get amongst their friends, and just like we used to get, we feel that we're invincible. You know what I mean? We can have a good time. Nothing's going to happen. But my advice to you tonight is wrap your arms around them and tell them how much you love them. And not only tell them how much you love them, but tell them how deadly and dangerous the use of drugs is. I know we used to say, just say no to drugs. And I know that didn't get much, that was more of a hype versus a message. But my advice tonight to you is to talk to your young people, your kids, your friends, your neighbors, your loved ones. Every day I get the police block in my office. You wouldn't believe the number of overdose that I see, or attempted overdose. A number of them are brought back by Narcan. And if you don't believe anything I say, I keep two vials of Narcan in my pocket every day of my life. Every coat pocket I have Narcan. I'll tell you a little something about my son. My son struggled with mental health issues. He tried to handle his own mental health issues by treating himself and medicating himself. And we all know that's a deadly mistake. He began inducing drugs and other alcohol and every other things in his life, got in trouble with the legal system, and his life came unglued. Wasn't the kid we raised. And he went out one night. Let me go back a step. After getting him out of trouble and going through all the steps that every good parent will do. And I don't want to hear anyone say anything about tough love, please. Tough love, what does it really mean? Sometimes tough love does not work. Sometimes it takes you to cry and be humble with your child and let them know what's going on. But my son, we finally got him under a protective order and treatment. Came back. He was better than the kid we raised. He was 6'8". He was a heck of a basketball player, football player, and baseball pitcher. Could have went places, but he went off to school and started experiencing in substance. And when he came home and moved back in with us, he was doing fine. He decided one night to go out with one of his friends. His friend had a girlfriend who wanted to meet my son. You know how that goes. And there's nothing wrong with that. We encourage it. That's fine. You're doing well. He went to be with them that particular night. He called me and he said, Dad, I'm not going to come home tonight because they're drinking and I'm not. and I don't want to get on the road with someone drinking. That's growing up right there. He came home the next morning. He wanted to mow the yard. He wanted to do all the things that we wanted him to do. He laid down on the couch. He was snoring. And that's another thing. If you hear your kid snoring, pay attention to it. Fentanyl poisoning can create a snoring problem. He lay down and he went to sleep. We thought he was okay because he always snores. My wife went to call him right around noon to tell him it was time to eat. It was on Memorial Day. We're having my famous barbecue ribs. And he didn't get up. So she called me and she said, CJ, that's what we call him. He's not getting up. So I walked over and took a look at his hands and his lips. I knew he was in trouble. So I immediately pulled these, well, not these, but the ones I used that particular day, Narcan out, and administered it to him. One shot up his nose, no reaction. Administered a second shot up his nose, no reaction. So we immediately, my wife and I started chest compressions and mouth to mouth to save our son. The paramedics were responding, did respond. We did not have a heartbeat at all while he was there and we were working on him. This was my son. I was devastated. Out of all the ugliness that went on 9/11 and Act 10 and all the other things, this was devastating in my life. Another thing in my life, I used to always be the one who would go and notify the parents or loved ones that their child wasn't coming home. That was my job in the police department. Very painful job. I never thought I'd experience it myself. So finally, the paramedics were able to get a heartbeat, load him up, and take him out. And it would be the last time he'd come to our home. I mean, I'm to this day, I'm devastated by it because what killed my son is something a lot of people use, not only our youth, but our adults, marijuana. Anybody believe marijuana can kill you? It was laced with fentanyl. So that's what took his life. You know, people were saying, well, he's a drug addict and he's got problems. And, you know, some of that was true in the past. But what took my son's life was marijuana laced with fentanyl. And one of the big problems we have right now, we have our young people. And again, I'm going to be open and honest with you. Marijuana, I've tried it once when I was growing up as a child, didn't like it. I'm not going to label a kid a bad kid or a drug addict for using marijuana. I'm not going to do it. But I can tell you this, they better know if they're out using marijuana, where they're getting it from, where it come from, and whether or not it's pure, because it will kill you instantly. People were shocked when they learned he had died from marijuana laced with fentanyl. Investigation went on. We couldn't prove a whole lot. It's not closed yet, but the investigation went on to show that he was with some people, they smoked marijuana. He was the only one affected by it. And that could be because he had been supposedly off drugs for a long time. And when you come back and try to start where you left off, it's too powerful and it takes your life. So what I'm saying to you tonight here, we're living in a very difficult times, and we have to really reach out to our children. We have to sit down and have that honest conversation with them. And I know they don't want to hear it. We're old. We don't understand anything. You know how they feel about. They love us, but we're old. We don't have any good advice. But I'm telling you right now, sit down with your kids and tell them the danger of drugs. Tell them the danger of alcohol. Tell them the dangers of marijuana. Everybody I talk to, marijuana won't hurt you. Basically, maybe they got a point with it. When it's laced with fentanyl, it will kill you. So I really, really want, if you don't hear anything else I said tonight, go home and have that conversation. But not only your kids. Like I say, we read these blogs anywhere from 9 years old. I had one the other day. I saw 60. The guy was 68 and his wife was 67. They both OD'd and died. Marijuana laced. So it's just not a kid thing. It's a people thing. It's a people thing. So we have to do our part. We have to get, and I really appreciate Jess being here and taking the leadership that she's going to try to rally the schools. Michelle is out working extremely hard right now, working with our lawmakers. And that's another area we're going to have to go to them. We need help. We need financing. We need treatment. We need recovery. We need all these things to help our young people. You realize one bad incident with fentanyl can cost a person's life. And the thing about it, it's not always just laced in marijuana. They sell fentanyl drugs. And you may think you're buying another drug. And I'm telling you right now, kids and adults, basically will try anything sometimes, and that's not a negative thing about our young people. It just is, we have to find a way to sit down and reach them. And it's going to be a difficult conversation. Mom, you don't know anything. Dad, you don't know anything. You don't get it. Or, we don't do this kind of thing. And besides, I wouldn't try anything anyhow. When you get out and you get at that party and everybody's having a good time, everybody's having fun, nobody thinks about what could happen. So what I'm saying again, it's a very dangerous time. Over 100,000 deaths. And what really bothers me a lot, it's not making the news. It's not out there like it should be. I mean, there should be warnings everywhere. There should be education everywhere. There should be tons of dollars going into this treatment program and also a preventive program to help deal with this type of situation, because I'm telling you, it's very, very, very deadly. So I can really get on a roll, and I'm not going to do that. Michelle knows that. I get on a roll sometime at Rotary, and she has to take the mic from me. But I just want to I just can't emphasize enough the dangerous situation we are in. I don't want you walking out there looking over your shoulder, scared to death. But I'm telling you right now, it's okay to be a little paranoid. Things are really, really tough. And these dangerous drugs are floating all over the place. And I talk to my law enforcement buddies every day. And, it's very, very hard to control because they're coming in from everywhere. They're being sold in school. And I know I talked to a group over, well, I won't say the community. And you know what they said to me? It's a Black thing. It happens in the Black community. I can tell you right now, that's not true. As a law enforcement officer and as the director of emergency management, I've seen and been to a lot of scenes where it's been young white kids, other kids of color who've lost their life to this terrible drug. So I'm gonna slow down a little bit and let Michelle, is that okay? And then we can take time for questions. I have a lot more I can say, but I don't want to hog all the time. Okay.
Thank you, Charles. So I'm Michelle Kullman, and I live here in Waunakee, and I lost my beautiful 18-year-old son, Cade Reddington, to a fentanyl poisoning less than 6 months ago. And I have to thank Charles because I found him through a mutual friend shortly after Cade passed and reached out to him. And he has been so encouraging and in reaching out to me and making sure I'm doing okay, knowing exactly what I'm going through and how hard this is. So doing these talks is really hard. It's really emotionally draining. It's only been less than 6 months. But as I've been telling people, like when you lose a child, this grief is so overwhelming. It lives in every single cell of your body from head to toe. And me doing this advocacy work and being outspoken and trying to save other people from this horrible nightmare that I'm living is the one thing that keeps me going. So just to talk a little bit about Cade, he was a freshman at UW-Milwaukee living in the dorms. And Cade was this amazing, just bright, shining light, a big ball of energy. We actually got these t-shirts made and Beam the Light because he was the type of kid that just would light up the room when he would walk into it. He had such an outgoing personality and could talk to anybody. And he would come into the room and it would just shift the energy in the room because people would be so excited to see them and him. And he was so welcoming to everybody. And I've heard from so many of his friends now that said, I was a shy person. Cade made me feel comfortable. He just always was there for me. He had so many people that he would reach out to. And even though he dealt with his own struggles with some depression, if he knew if somebody was having a tough time, he was always there for them. So Cade did struggle with a little bit of depression, and I always asked him if he felt like he was suicidal, and he didn't. And I was just like, okay, well, every kid these days seems to deal with some depression. So it was nothing that was overly alarming. But now in hindsight, I can look back and see how this started his journey of starting to experiment with drugs. So I know his first experiment with substance use was in middle school when he started vaping. And I would find the vapes and I would take them away. He'd get grounded. He'd get his phone taken away. He's like, Mom, everybody's doing it. And he's like, it's just the flavored water. And just made it seem like it was not a big deal because everybody was doing it. And I know it's not everybody, but a lot of the kids start vaping, and it's very normalized among these kids to be doing it. Even though he said it was a flavored water, I'm sure he was getting the nicotine pods. And I think at that age in middle school, that really alters your brain chemistry. And because he had this propensity for, I believe he had the type of brain that was probably lent itself more to an addictive personality. So I'm sure what happened is when he got introduced to the opportunity to try marijuana, he was just the type of kid that was a risk taker. And he was like, sure, I'll try that. So I know that it progressed into some marijuana use and drinking, and then leading into his junior year of high school, he had a couple of incidents where he got in trouble. He got a DUI, and it was just a weird circumstance. He actually was not driving. He made a good choice, even though he was drinking, to turn the keys over to somebody else, but that person was 15 years old and hit a curb and got a flat tire, and so they couldn't drive the car anymore. That kid got picked up by somebody else, left Cade with the car by himself. So when the police showed up, Cade didn't tell them that a 15-year-old was driving. He said he was driving, so he ended up with a DUI with a .08. So that, and then when junior year started, he was doing cross country and he was super excited for the wrestling season. And he loved wrestling. That was his sport and he was really good at it. And the night before a cross country meet, he was at a friend's house out in the country. The neighbors called the police. He had had one beer and the police showed up and he got a underage ticket. And he had had one other incident at school where he had gotten in trouble. So that was 3 strikes and he was out. So he lost his sports eligibility and he was devastated. And then that was a big wake-up call for him, though. And he realized that he needed to, if he wanted to get his sports eligibility back for senior year, he needed to clean up his act. So he dropped that group of friends, and that he knew that they were bad news, and he started cleaning up his act. He found a whole new group of friends, started going to youth groups for church, was going to 2 youth groups, started going to church on Sundays with them. Then he started going to NA meetings with a friend. And I said, well, Cade, why are you going to NA meetings if you're not using drugs? And he said, oh, it's the same principle as AA. And I just really want to get sober and I want my sports eligibility back. And I was like, well, that's great. So he got his 90-day sober chip and was so excited. He wore it on his shoe to school and was so proud of it. And then I think it was shortly after that was when he told me that the prior year when he was hanging out with these other kids that he was experimenting with Adderall and Xanax, and but that he wasn't doing that anymore, and he had been going to these NA meetings and was seeing a counselor, and I thought he was great and had gotten past that stage. And I was actually thankful I didn't know about it when he was doing it because that would have been devastating, and I thought we were good. So when he went to UW Milwaukee, I'll fast forward to what happened that night is it was Wednesday night, and at this Club Miramar down by campus, it's $20 wristband, all you can drink rail drinks. And he apparently had a fake ID, and I believe he met up with the suspected drug dealer before he went into the bar. And we know they took a picture. His last picture taken was at 10:32. We found out he got kicked out of the bar at 10:36 because one of the bouncers caught him in the bathroom taking this Percocet. And I know he clocked back into his dorm at 10:50. So, and then there's a video of him riding in the elevator with a girl. And she told me in the video that when she puts her head back, it's because he told her he took a Percocet and he was feeling yucky. But because of this lack of education and awareness, these kids had no idea about one pill can kill, and that 40% of pills with fentanyl have enough to kill you. So it was not on her radar that this was something to be really concerned about. So they went back to his dorm, and he had 3 suite mates, and he went and laid down in the beanbag chair, and they thought he just fell asleep. And I would assume he started snoring. So it was Wednesday night, they kicked the girl out of the room, and the other suite mates, 2 of them went to bed, 1 stayed up and was working on his computer. And then when he got up to turn the light off and go to bed, he realized that the way Cade was laying in the beanbag chair was not quite right, and his fingernails were blue, and that he had shallow breathing. And again, because these kids were not trained and nobody's talking about this, they did not know the signs of a drug overdose. They took the time to Google search his symptoms. And once they were like, check, 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 then 911 still wasn't called. They went and got the RA on the floor below. And then the RA came up, and then 911 was called. And by the time the paramedics got there, they administered 4 rounds of Narcan, and it was not enough to save him. And he was pronounced dead at 1:19 in the morning. So I got a call. I was at my fiance Peter's house at 6:00 in the morning. Thank goodness I was not home alone the night before, because they came to my house first and I wasn't there. So they went to my ex-husband's house. And I'm so thankful that I was with my loved one when I found out the news, when I got the phone call at 6 in the morning, because it is nothing that any parent should ever have to hear. And I just said, drug overdose? What? No, there's no way. He doesn't do that. He knows better. It was just so dumbfounding to have this happen. And and I didn't know about fentanyl. I had no idea. So as we put the pieces together, and I did find out that he was going down a road, and he probably, if he didn't already, did have a substance use disorder, because I found out he had taken some Percocets leading up to that night. So I'm assuming he needed to keep using to ward off any withdrawals. So anyways, yeah, it's really horrible, and like to have no idea that your son was doing this. And we're just like a normal family. Like my other son is commissioning into the Air Force as an officer after going through ROTC and graduating from UW-Madison with 3.6. So I've got one kid that is, going to be an Air Force officer, and I've got one that's dead from a fentanyl poisoning. It absolutely makes no sense. So if we go to the next slide now, Michelle. So, my brother came to visit from Washington, D.C., and he went on websites just kind of trying to figure out process, what happened. And he's like, Shell, you know what? The DEA has got this website about one pill can kill. And, we still didn't have the toxicology report back yet. We're like, that makes sense. Like, he took one pill and he's gone because of fentanyl. And so we started educating ourselves. And then shortly after Cade passed was when the news started coming out that there was 100,000 overdose deaths in the last year, and 66,000 of those are because of fentanyl. We had no idea. And now the other news that we find out is that now fentanyl is the #1 cause of death of 18 to 45-year-olds. And it blows my mind, like Charles was saying, that this is not being screamed from the rooftops. This is killing more people than COVID, and everybody knows about COVID a million times a day. But we're not talking about this as a nation. And what I've also been finding out is, that's how much fentanyl it takes to kill you. It is 2 milligrams. It's nothing. So what's happening is, this is all on the DEA website, the precursor chemicals are made in China. The Chinese are sending it to the cartels in Mexico, and they don't care how they're mixing it. It's not scientific. They're throwing it in a vat. Some's got no fentanyl in it. Some's got enough to kill 5 or 10 people in it. And they just don't care because fentanyl is so cheap to produce. And they're making so much money that they do not care that they're killing their customers. And the other thing is it is so highly addictive. Fentanyl is 50 times more addictive than heroin or morphine. It's 50 times more powerful than morphine, but it's way more addictive than heroin also. 100 times more addictive? Okay. So what's happening too is for the drug dealers, it's repeat business. So they're lacing the fentanyl into these pills and into the marijuana and into heroin and into meth and every drug imaginable, because the first time you take it, you're addicted and they're going to keep them coming back. So in today's world, and this is the message that I'm trying to get out to people, is that you cannot, it's not like in the 80s when people could experiment and do cocaine and, fine, you can try it once. You experiment now, you're either going to end up addicted or you're going to end up dead eventually. So that's the message that I'm trying to get out. And so this next slide, this goes to show. So now I'm on these Facebook groups with all these parents that have lost their kids to fentanyl poisonings. So I'm learning so much. So many of these parents have lost their teenagers that are 13 to 16 years old because their kids have found their drugs on Snapchat. This is from the DEA website also. This is this whole language that the drug dealers use. They're delivering the drugs right to the kids' houses underneath the parents' nose, and their parents are finding them dead in their beds. It's horrific. So if you go to the next slide. This is Cade. This was a video that apparently he made for TikTok when he thought that TikTok was going away. So it sounds like it's like maybe a suicidal thing, but it's not. This is for TikTok. But I just wanted you to hear some of his own words. Oh, how I wish he would have listened to his own words on that. And you know what? Cade was the type of kid that thought he was invincible. He's like, thought nothing was going to happen to him. In that age, their brains aren't fully developed. They don't understand the risks. And I mentioned these Facebook groups this Facebook group that I'm on. One of them is called Lost Voices of Fentanyl. And I'm going to show you something that's very sobering. There's 13 of these banners that are made with all young people that have died from fentanyl poisonings. And all these kids thought they were invincible, thought it couldn't happen to them. But guess what? It's a whole new world, and it does. So I just put some resources up here. I've got a new friend, Isaac Solis, who's in Milwaukee. He lost his son a couple of years ago to fentanyl poisoning, and he started onepillkills.org, and he's got a whole social media account around that also. Songforcharlie.org was also started by a family that lost their son to fentanyl poisoning, who was 16. And then the DEA has got a lot of really good information on their website as well for One Pill Kills. So I could probably go on and on. Michelle, do I have another minute? Okay. She wanted me to talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing. And so one thing that I found out after Cade passed was that there was another young man who died at UW Milwaukee in the same dorm as Cade on February 14th of 2021. And his parents found me a couple weeks after Cade passed. So we've really teamed up, and we're mad. Like, this is just unacceptable that this is happening and that we're not talking about it. We requested a meeting with ex-Governor Tommy Thompson, who was he was the president of the UW system. And we had a Zoom meeting with him in January and asked him to mandate that they get Narcan boxes installed on every college campus. We thought he was going to mandate it. It came up a little bit short of a mandate, but he did send out a memo on March 10th to every single chancellor, encouraging them to install the Narcan rescue boxes on all the campuses. And they did create an awareness campaign for students also that they're going to be unveiling here soon. So we know UW Oshkosh led the charge on this. They got Narcan boxes installed last fall. I've heard that Eau Claire is ready to move forward, as is UW-Madison, as is Milwaukee, which I can't believe they don't have them yet after 2 overdose deaths last year, but it's apparently in the works. So I know we're being heard and that people are starting to wake up to this, but it's not happening fast enough for me because I know every single day that goes by, there's more kids that are dying, and I don't want to see that happen. So, all right, I think I'm going to stop now.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Jessica Moehn. I work for the school district of Waunakee as the alcohol, tobacco, other drug kind of prevention coordinator for the district. And so I work in kind of a district-wide lens with Michelle and the coalition and doing work with students kind of in all grade levels around alcohol prevention, around tobacco prevention, and like drug prevention. So a lot of my work is geared more towards middle school and high schoolers. Michelle comes in with the coalition and tries to do a lot more of that prevention work with intermediate school kids, which is really great, but getting at that prevention much earlier than high school and middle school when kids are already kind of experimenting like you said Cade did. So it's really important for us to kind of help kids learn skills to not use drugs or kind of get rid of that like don't say no and like perspective, because it's going to come up in social situations where they don't want to look uncool or things like that. So we're really trying to help younger kids learn those skills as they get older, and so that once they do get to high school and college, they have the skills developed. So I'm just going to share a couple updates on trends that we're seeing in schools. So one that has been big for the last 5 or 6 years is still around vaping. So we're still seeing a lot of vaping in schools. A lot of kids have switched from vaping nicotine to vaping marijuana. And there was a lot of news stories within the last couple of years about the stuff that's being laced in marijuana, the unknowing where the marijuana cartridges are coming from. So still trying to work with kids on, like Charles kind of said, like knowing where your drugs come from, because if you don't know where they're from, there's a good chance that there's something potentially else in there. So we're still seeing a lot of vapes. And then other things that kids are vaping comes around like CBD oil. So you can click through. I kind of adapted this presentation from one that I do with high school and middle school coaches every year. Yeah, sorry. So I meet with coaches to kind of help them understand maybe what to look for in their athletes, as well as just kids in the high school and middle school. So CBD oil is something that's been really popular in the last few years, and it kind of falls in this legal gray area in the state of Wisconsin. So it can test positive for THC. So some kids, it's kind of lower doses, but when you're looking at a high school, especially like athletics or co-curricular perspective, it can test positive on drug screens, and it can be kind of a, oh, it's not that big of a deal, it's just CBD lens for kids. So I hear that a lot. And then this is the vaping of like marijuana or THC oil. So this is what I'm seeing just a lot of when I meet with kids, is that they are not smoking it as much, but vaping it out of pens. And is getting them high. And then this is a new one, which is called Delta 8. So you might see signs outside of grocery stores or like CBD shops that say like legal THC. So that's what this is. This is also in like a legal gray area. It's derived from hemp. It is very similar to THC, but the THC that is in like traditional marijuana is Delta 9. This is Delta 8. So it is essentially the same, just a slightly different chemical makeup. So it's not illegal in the state of Wisconsin. And so manufacturers are able to create this. It gets you high, just like THC would. And kids are obtaining these online, in stores, kind of wherever they can, and using that as a way to kind of get around Wisconsin's laws. Just to touch on alcohol, so that's another part of my role. We are seeing like alcohol use kind of going down a little bit. Some of it is maybe questionable because of the pandemic and kids were in fewer social situations where they would be drinking, things like that. But this year we've done, we did in February 11 focus groups with middle schoolers and high schoolers, trying to kind of understand what has changed since the pandemic. What are you guys seeing? What do you hear, like you hear your peers doing? So hopefully we'll have some more data coming soon about what's going on in school that we might not know. And then these are just some resources for parents and families. Briar Patch is one resource in Madison that has a really awesome like support network for parents of students who are like have substance use issues. And then some counseling resources. And I think kind of the last two are kind of some campaigns from the state of Wisconsin and from the federal government to just have those conversations with your kids and just start those conversations young, start talking about substance use and what that looks like. And having those conversations isn't going to make your kids start using them. It's going to make them feel more comfortable to talk with you if they do start experimenting, and you want to have that open dialogue. So I think that is kind of the end of my presentation. So I'll pass it back to Michelle.
Well, before we get to questions, I just want to thank our presenters for their bravery and their vulnerability tonight and their advocacy and their insight, because we know how important this issue is, and so grateful that you could share your stories and your information tonight with us. So I just want to share one quick thing about the coalition as we move into the rest of the month of April. But next week, we are actually having T Street come in. She's a national speaker in prevention. She's fantastic. She's going to be speaking to all of the middle school students, all of the high school students, as well as doing leadership training for some of the students. And then she's going to be doing a community event next week on Wednesday at the high school. And then the following week, we're going to do another library event here on healthy minds and healthy hearts and healthy bodies. And all of those brochures and flyers are over there. And as part of the coalition, we also have loads of resources. So we have lock bags and boxes, and we have locks you can put on your refrigerators to lock up your alcohol, things like that. All those are free to take if you want to do that. And we have a robust website as well that has lots of resources. So if you didn't get some of the things that were on there, you can go to our resource page as well. So I think with that, we're going to open it up for questions. And I'll just invite our presenters. I'll just pass the mic. And if you have specific questions, I think we can probably not even use the mic, to be honest, right? Because we only needed that for the recording. And